Hello, welcome to Consequential Leadership. This is a channel where, by the special grace of God, we are using biblical principles to share light on the concept of leadership, to explain the the effect of leadership, whether for good or for bad. But in this context, we are looking forward to the application of the principle of the kingdom of God that bring about desirable outcomes, so that when people rise up in moments of history, giving their unique circumstances, and offer direction that bring about blessing, that bring about improvement for the collective good of society, then that is leadership that is having a consequential effect. The last episode, we discussed a very unlikely character called Abigail in the Old Testament, where we saw a lady who did not have, by virtue of the culture, the tradition, and the gender labeling on her, did not have an authority to make the kind of decisions that she made. But albeit she did make those decisions that brought about an outcome that was beneficial to everyone, it saved David the potential of staining his profile with innocent blood, as well as the destruction of Nabal's household. Today we're going to look at another very unlikely character in this discussion of leadership from the Old Testament book of Numbers chapter 27. And we just want to talk about 5 virgins. The character in this account are 5 virgins. These 5 virgins stood out in a very outstanding way that set the path for a lot of the advocacy for women, gender equity, and gender balance advocacy we're having in the 21st century. Most people don't even realize that. So let's go to the story. If you're familiar with the Old Testament, you realize that after the children of Israel departed from Egypt, the journey to the promised land, according to Deuteronomy chapter 1, should have been maybe 2 weeks. But if you consider it the other way, it might, it was actually to last for less than 2 years when you put all the data together. Unfortunately, it took them 40 years. We all know from Numbers chapter 13, 14, it was because of their unbelief, which was a consequence of very unfortunate leaders that Moses chose solely on the basis of, tribal representation to go to represent an entire nation during a very critical moment in their, walk with God. But be as it may, the 10 tribes brought the evil report that corrupted the responses of all the people, and then the judgment of God came upon them. At the end of the day, Moses had also left the scene. Now the children of Israel are preparing to enter the promised land, and that is what we see in Numbers chapter 27 as they make preparation to enter the promised land. Of course, we all know that Moses didn't enter the promised land. The book of Deuteronomy is an account of a reflection on the entire journey from Egypt to the border of the promised land, and Moses' final messages before he departed the scene. But before we get to that point, we are seeing some earlier preparation of the people ahead of the great entry into the promised land. And one of those preparations included a census. In Numbers chapter 26, a census is taken, and the census data included just 2 things, right? The size of the tribe and the male population. The size of the tribe was important to determine the size of the land that will be given to the tribe. The second data in the census was whether you were male or female. If you were male, then you would be entitled to the inheritance. If you are female, you weren't entitled to the inheritance. That's according to the Mosaic Code. Now, when we get to chapter 27, we see 5 virgins who were daughters of a man called Zelophehad, who, because they didn't have male siblings, meant that they automatically were written off. Because now that their father is dead, right, and they didn't have male siblings, they will have nothing to inherit, even though they are going to the promised land that belong to all of them covenant children. That was to just seal their doom. If they didn't have a land to inherit, they would be automatically at the mercy of men that will show up eventually, or if no men show up, they are going to be at the mercy of society at some point in time or the other, because then the basis for prosperity will not be there. The basis to build their lives and to accumulate wealth to succeed will not be there, because they will have no inheritance, particularly land. They wouldn't have land because their father died in the wilderness and they didn't have male siblings. All of them were female. And because female didn't have inheritance, according to the Mosaic stipulations, it meant that they will enter the promised land free, but without any foundation for success or for prosperity. So we see these 5 girls responding in that very bleak prospects of their lives in a way that changed not just their lives, but changed also the regulation by Moses as, affirmed by God himself, confirmed by God himself, as well as set the foundation for the lot of advocacy that we see today in the public space, even in the 21st century, including, advocacy for gender equity, protection of women. It has its root in what these 5 virgins did, and it is important we see how they responded to their situation. The second amazing character of this girl's leadership response to, a very imbalanced prospect that did not give them a chance to succeed, was not only that they were visible, but they were motivated by a very strong sense of the future. What do I mean by that? The promised land was still a promise. The promised land was still in the future. Nobody had gone to see the promised land except for Joshua and Caleb. And this is now 40 years since these 2 men ever spied out the land. So the promised land wasn't a place that was free. It was still occupied by giants who live in 45 cities. It was because of that nature of the promise that caused the 10 tribes to bring the evil report that corrupted the entire nation, that unfortunately led to the delay of their travel in the wilderness for an additional 38 and a half years, eventually totaling to 40 years. So there were still unknowns. There were still, you may want to call, uncertainties. There wasn't necessarily, by all practical terms, any guarantee that the land was there. But because they were all convinced, because they knew the future was ahead of them, they knew that the future was more important than the present, they began to act in anticipation of that future. In other words, their decision to even mobilize themselves, all 5 of them, to break free from the frightening, prospects of even stepping forward as young ladies who were unmarried, obviously virgins who were orphans at the same time. The Bible didn't say whether their mother was alive, but even if their mother was alive, she had no place. She was a female anyway. By stepping forward to approach Moses on the issue of their affair was, a character of great courage. It was motivated by their conviction of the future. So they are making decisions now, anticipating what our future is. They weren't like some people who would think, well, we don't know whether the land will be there, or we don't know how it's going to work out. We're not even sure whether we will win because they have giants. The condition of the land 40 years earlier is still the same. We still have giants who live in 45 cities. All those facts were there. Yet these guys began to act in anticipation of that future. They were motivated by a very strong sense of the future. And that is a core element of leadership. Every act of leadership functions on the basis of the future. And this is exactly what these girls are doing here. Another character of their consequential leadership was not just that they had a very strong sense of the future, but they had a very accurate narrative of their condition. This is very key. What do I mean when I say accurate narrative? The journey of the promised land was a journey of a dramatic history, right? Besides the fact that God was doing mighty things among them, and most of them were responding in unbelief, leading to all kinds of unfortunate, consequences because of that. The worst being that they were condemned from entering the promised land They had to live in the wilderness until all that evil generation died out. In the process, different things were going on. One of those was the rebellion of Korah and the other guy that stood up against Moses, and then the ground opening and swallowing them up and dying. All kinds of things happening in the wilderness. So those people that were involved with that rebellion, obviously, had a very demeaning part of the demeaning, portion of the history of the wilderness journey. And what I mean by that is simply this, that those people die very disgraceful death. They die as a consequence of rebellion. All the people that are mobilized in that rebellion against Moses that provoked the judgment of God, thus leading to their very dramatic death, was a very shameful, disgraceful, and unfortunate aspect of the history. So by the time we get here to the border of the promised land, these people have had descendants, right? Those people who died, they had children. So the likelihood that these young ladies could have been perceived as children of parents who died in that rebellion against Moses. And they were very candid about this. They say that our father died in the wilderness a natural death. He wasn't part of the rebellion. So it has to be very clear. We do not want to be perceived as children from rebellious parents, or as children who come from an unfortunate family that wasn't obedient to the law or wasn't respectful to the leader of the country. They made that very clear, and it was their responsibility to do so, right? Now, that is very key, because, when perception takes, whole sway in society, rightly or wrongly, it becomes an ingrained mindset that is very difficult to rectify, to undo. Anytime a lie persists and the truth doesn't counter that, the lie will be considered a truth. And people who will be victims of that lie are just going to be unfortunately victims of something that isn't true at all. It's very critical for us to recognize this as these girls come up to make their claim. We are females, all right, it's not our fault. We don't have male siblings, it's not our fault. Our father died, it's not our fault. So just because we are female, we are orphans and we are virgins, unmarried, doesn't mean that we shouldn't have, opportunities in our own country. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't be given equal opportunity to excel as well. That was the implication of the narrative that they were propounding. It's very critical for you to understand, because in Western and modern, society, you might not appreciate what these girls were up against. They live in a very patriarchal society that did not give women equal footing with men. It was a very conservative society. It was a religious society. Everything was dictated by the Mosaic code, the patriarchal, nature of the Mosaic code, which means that it was a male-dominated society. It was a male-dominated culture. So if you were a female and you weren't married, and worse, you were an orphan, that meant you didn't have any place. You didn't have a chance to excel, especially when it came to the inheritance. Yet the girl said, look, we have a clean story, and I want you, Moses, to know our story. We don't come from a rebellious family. That is very key. Your courage, your ability to maintain an accurate narrative of who you are, where you come from, and where you are headed is very key in the discussion of consequential leadership. And this guy demonstrates it very, very powerfully. The last one I want to talk about, the 5 virgins in the walk of consequential leadership, was not just that they maintain an accurate narrative of their condition, but they had an appropriate messaging. Their messaging was accurate, just as their narrative was accurate. What do I mean when I say their messaging was accurate? It's not enough to know the truth if you don't know how to communicate that truth. It's not enough to be in the right if you do not know how to convey that right. The girls come and say, you know what? Our father did not die with any rebellious people. Our father died a natural death. So we should not be seen as people that come from a rebellious family. We should not be treated in a condescending manner. We too are God's children. By implication, that's what they meant. But they were also able to communicate it to Moses in a way where that claimed Moses' attention, and Moses could not walk away from it. How did they do it? In verses 3 and 4 of Numbers chapter 27. This is what they say. Let not our father's name be lost to his clan just because he had no son. Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen. You see, they quoted their request with their father's name. Why was that important? Because by mentioning their father's name, by projecting their father's name, automatically provided hearing in Moses because their father was a male. Yes, their request was for their interest, understood. Yes, they were advocating for equal opportunities because they are female, correct. But the way they packaged their message was such that Moses could not walk away from it. In other words, they enshrine themselves in the name of their father. They package themselves and put themselves behind the name of their father. By quoting their interests with their father's name, automatically claim attention in the public space because their father was a male. That's the way they were able to communicate their message. That was a very accurate narrative of their condition, having been motivated by the strong sense of the future and refusing to be anonymous. They claim Moses' attention. Our father died, and because he died, he should not lose a memory in the land of his fathers. Give us a place also. Just because we don't have male siblings doesn't mean that we weren't born from a family. Our father gave birth to us. And because we are his children, his descendants, we should not be alive and allow our father's memory to be erased. That automatically claimed Moses' attention because now it was an advocacy for an inheritance of one of Israel's sons. And guess what happened? The Lord changed that day. God responded to these 5 virgins' requests by telling Moses the girls are right. So all along, these stipulations were imbalanced. All along, these stipulations were unfair. All along, this Mosaic code that didn't give women a place was unfair to women. But these 5 virgins stood up, and by their bold requests and considering all the things we've talked about, their visibility, being motivated by the strong sense of the future, having the accurate narrative of their story, and packaging their messages in a way that claimed Moses' attention, changed the course of history forever. God said, henceforth, let it be written, let it be ratified in the Mosaic regulation for the governance of my people, that when a man dies in Israel without a male child, they should find, the girl's children should be entitled to the inheritance. If they don't have, he should find a brother. If they don't have, they should find cousins. By all means, nobody's name should be erased just because an unfortunate experience of life, such as not being able to have a male child. And that became the ratification of the law by God's own confirmation. 5 virgins changed the course of history, not just for the nation of Israel going forward from that point, but it also has become the basis for all the advocacy for gender equity and women's rights that we are experiencing today in the 21st century. And interestingly, most people may not even realize that the root of this advocacy for women in the most moral and proper manner is in the story of these 5 virgins. This is the way I bring this episode to a close on consequential leadership. I hope that these 5 virgins have taught us some very remarkable lessons about the subject of leadership that turns out to bring desirable outcomes on society. God bless you until I see you again. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and comment as well. Like it and share it. All of that is contributing to the improvement of the content and to the spreading of the message of consequential leadership. I'll see you again.